Hello, everyone,
My name's Eric Mack.
and want to talk about like the past of journalism, where we are now, and where we're going, and why we see decentralization as part of a solution to the media industry today. So,
The thing that I'm probably think is the most important and where I deliver the most value, it's never what they fucking want to talk about. They never want to talk about crypto. They never want to talk about trail running. They never want to talk about like other stuff that I'm like very passionate about. Instead of following the Kevin Kelly route where it's like, I'm going to do my art and 100 people will let me do it forever. Like that might not, in this world where everyone's trying to do that, maybe that doesn't fucking make sense anymore. I know 60% of Gen Z wants to be influencers. It's not gonna happen.
look, there are a lot of reasons I loved working in consensus, but one of the things that really impacted me there was I realized I could actually make more impact with our technology by putting it in the hands of folks in Africa, in LATAM, in developers' hands that can then take that technology and change the problem in their community. With technology, you can just drop it into a container and then watch it go. And I feel like that is one of the most beautiful things about our tech is watching it just have that network effect as people begin using it in places where it is necessary.
It needs to be the context of what we wanna see. There's this, like, quote that I heard that's sticking with me is, like, "You end war not by hating war, but by loving peace." It's like you're in some ways contributing to that energy of war and, uh, dysfunction and polarity and separation if that's, like, what you hate. It feels like you're fixing it by hating it, and you're paying attention to all the people who are, like, dissing on people, dunking on people, and, like, you got your side, and you're just gonna take down this other side or whatever, but you can see at its core that it's really just gonna perpetuate.
Hello, everyone. Just want to welcome everybody back to another episode. We are JournoDAO, we're guest hosts this season, and today we are going to rip the band-aid off and talk about our industry, journalism. And all of us on this call were journalists at one point, and spent a lot of time in the craft of journalism. But all of us started in an analog world. So that is how we learn to tell stories, with pen and paper, or for me, film and camera. And want to talk about like the past of journalism, where we are now, and where we're going, and why we see decentralization as part of a solution to the media industry today. So I'm gonna let y'all do brief intros on yourselves and your journalism background, so people have context.
Yeah, Keith Axline. I spent about 9 years at, Wired Magazine, came in as writing intern, and left later as an editor, then went to, Medium, the blogging platform, and then became software developer the last 7 or 8 years. And yeah, really happy to have found JournoDAO in my first time around in Web3.
My name's Eric Mack. Started in broadcast journalism 25 years ago, in kind of the public radio universe, and then kind of gravitated from broadcasting into a more traditional, well, not traditional, online journalism, covering a lot of tech and science for uh, primarily CNET and Forbes, but a whole lot of other brands in there over the years. And today, I'm still a senior contributor at Forbes, but also a writer for Consensus. So, and also, yeah, kind of came into the Web3 world via you folks and via JournoDAO and seeing like some parallels between blockchain and journalism that not a lot of people have caught on yet, but we're still working on it.
I'm Crystal Street. I started in journalism in 1996. I was a staff photographer at a regional paper in Southwest Virginia, and then began freelancing. Mostly did community journalism. Went back to study journalism professionally after about 10 years of freelancing at University of Chapel Hill, or University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and that's where I really got deep into more documentary work, more photojournalism. From learned from some amazing mentors, and then after I rolled out of journalism school, the economy tanked. I was set to go study and work as a foreign correspondent was kind of my track, and then the industry just kind of fell apart. So I ended up doing all of the things that a person who has a camera in their hands does to pay the bills, which involved advertising. Some of my clients were Whole Foods, Nissan. Some of it was just ridiculous. Did TV commercials, and then was like, all right, I'm done with this shit and stumbled into blockchain around 2012 because my colleagues were living in Pakistan and they kept Gmailing me, and I was like, "Y'all have to stop with this." So I found this Bit Message, which was a peer-to-peer messaging platform, which ended up being on a blockchain. So that's how I got into the tech. I knew of Bitcoin at that point, but didn't really have any interest in it. But then I actually saw a real use case for this beyond monetization and then stumbled into crypto at a hackerspace. Also joined that hackerspace to learn more about protecting free speech, how journalists can use technology to, protect themselves with privacy metrics and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's kind of my backstory. Ended up at Consensus as well, and in some weird crypto bubbles. And here we are. We're still here. And this is also my sidekick. So if you see wiggling, he was here for the last episode. So I threw out our show notes last night and we just decided to just dive deep into the media, all the things, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a good scope of optimism and pessimism in this group right here. So we're just going to dive in and out of conversation and hopefully we will land in solutions. That is kind of our goal here. So we started off listening to an Edward R. Murrow clip and had a really good debate and realized, Eric's like, yeah, hit record. So why don't we start there? This conversation, I'm not going to play it. I will put it in the show notes. It's a clip from Good Night and Good Luck, which looked at how Edward R. Murrow took on McCarthyism and Senator McCarthy. And the speech was in 1958. It was an award that he received for his work. And he called out the industry, basically saying that if this industry doesn't figure out a way to use technology, at the time, radio and television, to inform and instead chooses a path to just entertain, then 50 to 100 years from now, we're going to be in a place where we don't want to be as a society. And it's pretty much come true. And that is without the acceleration we have with social media. So I'm going to kick it to either one of y'all. Where do you want to pick up that thread that we were just playing with? Or where do you want to start if you want to go somewhere else?
I think we were discussing nostalgia for the past, and I was taking issue with like uh, the premise that maybe it was like truly a golden age, and these journalism principles were fully realized, and then that perfection was sullied. And to me, I mean, I get romantic about that stuff too, and I love it. But as far as like people who don't share that idea about that time period and just are more about like, well, how is this relevant to me now? Um, I'd like to, focus on what worked about that time period and what we can bring back, but then also very much emphasize that just like the early internet that had a lot of great ideas that weren't fully realized, and then got sidetracked by the advertising model. I think there's a lot of great principles that we should definitely adhere to, revive from previous eras, but that we should uh, really look to the future with more of a greenfield creativity and mindset, and realize that there's so much more that we can do. And it's not just reinstating something old that people have formed all sorts of weird views about.
I mean, I think we could do the simple thought experiment of like so that was in like the 50s or 60s that this Edward R. Murrow clip we're referring to would have been from, right?
58. Yep.
58. Okay. So like, we do the simple time travel thought experiment of if you had a choice, would you prefer to live in 1958 or in 2025? Now, sometimes I think I might not mind rewinding like 10 years, but then and it's like the first time I've ever felt that way about, well, maybe there would be a time just a little bit back in the past. Would I want to live in 1958 over 2025? Absolutely not. And so like I think I think where maybe the argument gets confused is like most things I think are better in our modern age than in 1958, with the notable exception of that the information landscape and like understanding your world, being on the same page with your neighbor, having a common shared understanding of reality, that was better in 1958. So like that is the one notable thing that is really fucked right now. And so like I think part of what JournoDAO is about, but there's like nothing we can do about that. That's just like the onward march of technology that like you really can't do anything about. And like I really think that the solution for bad technology is more technology, and like that's what we're interested in here. Like, if the old centralized ways of establishing authority and establishing um, our shared agreement on what reality is, if those have broken down in the face of a faster paced and more complex and complicated society and reality. So, you know, one of the things that Keith has been building with Seed Protocol is perhaps we can use new technology and blockchain to build new decentralized ways of establishing what is real, what deserves authority, what deserves attention through primitives like attestation. So like maybe that's one through line from Edward R. Murrow to what we're working on.
Yeah, I like that. I like that through line. The attestations is really what kicked it off for me because you can then begin to bring back in some sort of balance of truth or accountability for things that are stated. And I feel like that is the thing from past journalism, from Murrow's time, where journalists had time to actually get into a story and they were resourced in a way where they could go deep. And that was lost as media became consolidated and as information production and consumption sped up. And again, our theme here is acceleration in general for this season. So as we accelerated in how we produced and presented news, we lost that slow journalism approach, which is the same with as a lot of industries. Like slow food is another really good movement we could look at and compare, where someone had the time to go to the town council meeting, to sit there and get all the different viewpoints, follow up and have long conversations with people involved in the story, and then really get into the investigative side of what was going on in an issue, and then present it to the public in a way that was logical, that wasn't then bombarded by a bunch of bots or whatever bullshit is the conversation of the day, so that the message is then buried in garbage and conversation that's designed to polarize. And I feel like that is the one thing that blockchain could at least help with in some capacity, is to slow things down. And if you're going to put a statement on chain and then attest to it, you're putting your reputation on the line. And that opens up a different conversation, which back then, that was also the case. You were putting your reputation on the line because there was one person with a microphone telling you what was going on in the world, and that one person could be held accountable. We've lost that, I think.
Yeah, and I think for me, the way that attestations um, manifest that is that they're almost like a digital representation of that connective tissue that used to just exist interpersonally because there wasn't a way to interface with people outside of your community, so you don't really think about it. But now that we've kind of scaled globally with a very like centralized digital infrastructure, I think attestations hold potential to bring back those sort of trust mechanisms and the sort of emergent reputation where we don't have to rely on, a company like Yelp or whatever the equivalent is for whatever industry of like some sort of like 5-star BS where everybody is like 4.7 stars because everyone's polite and there's no signal there and you don't really know if this is going to be good. And so you're back to like, there might as well just not be a rating system, right? So we need something like a lot more nuanced, something that reflects our own experience. And I think that can get lost in the discussion of the actual technology, but like that's what we're hoping to manifest is technology that can bring um, human intuition and wisdom into the digital space. You don't have to like learn like some esoteric UX or UI or understand like how your email gets routed through like all these different servers just to enact your will on the internet, but that you can just be yourself intuitively and the things that you expect to happen, just like, I mean, more or less in real life. I mean, we'll just give real life the upper hand here and say it would be better if digital world were more like that in that respect. So, um, I don't want to, we aren't really technology focused, but we are like much more human focused and figuring out how we can empower people to be their best selves and do what they want to do before being influenced by any sort of business agenda on the internet. Um, and I think journalism is like perhaps the front line, and it's not one that really people are talking about because that's kind of the connective tissue to your community where you actually have power to do things, and nobody's really engaged in their community. So it's one of the many reasons they feel powerless, and that leads to all sorts of downstream decisions that are probably not the best.
So I think I only halfway agree with the premise that like where we've lost the slow journalism. I do think we've lost it on the local level, for sure. And like I'll come back to that in a second, but like on like beyond like the reporting on school board meetings and all that stuff that really has gone away. Like if we go back to the Edward Murrow era, those news broadcasts where you got like 15 minutes a day, and so like you got your newspaper, you got your 15 minutes a day. Like that actually is like a lot more right now. And like there's this very strange bifurcation of like how we get information where like we kind of assume, oh, like we have no attention span now. Like everyone's just on TikTok and like scrolling through 15-minute clips. Yeah, except for when they're listening to 3.5 hour podcasts. So like there is a demand for like all kinds of stuff. And I actually think there is tons of slow journalism going on, but it's in these like weird pockets of like podcasts and documentaries, and it's not in the normal channels that like we grew up with, but it is there. The problem is it's harder to find. It's not where like particularly folks of older generations are going to go looking for it. It's of insanely uneven quality, I think, because you've got documentaries that are often just at like works of activism, which is fine, but like a lot of people will not know the difference between that and like more rigorous journalism. And same goes with like Joe Rogan, who I don't think prepares for interviews. And so like that subbing in for journalism is also a problem. I think attestations are again a way to kind of help solve this and make this like weird landscape more navigable. And then like on the local journalism side where stuff really has dried up, and we have like news deserts, like my hope and interest for Web3 is like, oh, there's this completely other different aspect of that, nothing to do with attestations, where like, oh, well, we could spin up, community currencies that can be linked to, citizen journalism. And there's, interesting experiments that were tried, like civil and other experiments that are ongoing. And it's kind of like, Web3 is this crazy thing that like every problem that journalism has, it's like I could find something in blockchain that could address this. It hasn't really been deployed at scale yet, but yeah, I still think all the answers are there. They just have to be built and made usable.
And I feel like too that's also like an issue on the fintech side of blockchain. It's like the collapse or the transition or just the forced change hasn't happened yet because journalism is still kind of hanging on by a thread. Like right now, Wired and Rolling Stone are some of the best long form investigative journalism out there in a mainstream format. Until those things start to fall away, then local outlets, have they're more resourced at that point because there's nothing that exists. And I don't know if we're going to get to the point where all the media is gone, But we're at a point where a lot of media is not trusted. So people, like you're saying, like they turn to long form podcasts, which are great, but all of that stuff is so hard to find, especially when algorithms are delivering information in a certain way. I would love to think that we're able to get to a point where we can take our technology and experiment on the local level again, which I think is the premise, or I know is the premise of JournoDAO from its inception. Is like, how can we, the meme was, how do we buy a newspaper and decentralize it? And now I think, which is kind of an interesting evolution, is how do we take something like a knowledge garden or a shared digital platform that a community is contributing to, and then how do we put mechanisms in place to fund things so that journalists who are in those towns, who are in news deserts, can turn to a different format for the craft of journalism.
Yeah, and if people are wondering about the scale of the opportunity here, all you need to do is look at the valuations of like Facebook and Google, and all that value was essentially generated within communities, and it was the most profitable data and information, came from very niche, specific communities. And if there's a way to actually keep the value that's generated within your local community, I think people are just kind of share shocked and conditioned over the years to view, the deficits as uh, and the under resourced institutions, their towns, their local communities as just like a given. And my vision is like Web3 money, but like within the community and helping people directly with the things that are important to them and the value that they're generating, actually going either staying in that community or coming back to them, threefold through the mechanisms that we've seen only applied to um, meme coins or just more uh, either abstract or still global and not like locally grounded um, money games. And, we haven't, it could happen anytime, but that's like, I think what gets us waking up every day and working on this stuff is just a different playing field where it's not a financial liability to decide to be a journalist in your community or even just perform acts of journalism. If we're going to, you know, make it a more modular process, which I think makes sense and we could talk about, but even in the traditional sense, I think there's a lot of value being generated that's not seen, it's not materialized, it definitely is not then given back to the journalist.
And one of the things too that surfaced while you were talking about that we've talked about so much and actively tried to be a part of is getting journalists to adopt this technology. We've gone to journalism conferences. We were pretty much the only Web3 nerds in the room trying to tell people why this technology matters. The last one we attended 2 years ago was heavy into AI. And, part of the panels that we talked on or that we presented on showed that blockchain is the counterbalance to AI if it's implemented in a certain way. The problem, and just to call out our industry, our not journalism, but Web3 crypto, is the narrative is so fucked that journalists won't even touch the technology. They immediately check out because they've seen the stories from FTX to, the money laundering coin that our current administration is using. Like, it's really, really hard to get a journalist to open up to technology in general, but then also to open up to a technology that is hard to understand. And the only real exposure they've had to it are through the narratives that have been run throughout the mainstream media. And partially because the crypto industry never really owned their narratives to the point where a journalist who was logical and has a background in investigation could come in and say, okay, here's how this tech can be used, not the games, the pumps and dumps and the rug pulls and all that. Like, all of that shit is ridiculous. And it's, preventing really amazing professionals from adopting our technology. So that's my soapbox.
I mean, I feel like a pretty fair amount of blame lays with the actual journalists for this as well. I think that there's just a substantial amount of kind of laziness around actually diving into I don't see okay, particularly the Ethereum ecosystem that I really have an affection for in particular. I don't see it reflected the Ethereum that I know. It's not reflected in mainstream media coverage anywhere. I've never seen it. There was maybe one for a moment in 2021. There were a few interesting. Oh, these DAOs are kind of interesting. There were a couple of articles, and that is it. And since FTX, it is complete groupthink of well, crypto bad for climate, and it's there was the Atlantic. I listened to an Atlantic podcast where it was it was just a litany of all of the negative tropes about crypto, and this is like a couple weeks ago. I couldn't believe it. It was recycling stuff from um, years ago, and the Atlantic is usually pretty good. Uh, so there's a ton of garbage in our ecosystem, and there is always going to be. Just like there is always going to be on the internet. And, the internet has gotten better about filtering things out, largely through Web 2 platforms. And I do think the media is kind of coming to grips finally with the cost to society of allowing Web 2 platforms to play that role. Sooner or later, the mainstream media will kind of come around to the actual um, value and importance of blockchain. You would think it's pretty obvious with being that counterbalance to AI. I see that a little bit. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to hold my fellow colleagues to the fire there a little bit on this one.
No, that's a great point, and we're seeing it with AI again too. Like, they're doing that same resistance to AI to the point where I mean, we saw it when journalism transitioned from analog to digital. I saw it as digital photography, and I held on to my film as long as humanly possible, and then I missed the boat when everybody switched to multimedia, and I had to do a quick acceleration to get back on board and to be employable again. And we're seeing the same thing with AI. And there's no way around the fact that AI is here. It's going to change everything. It is changing everything. And you can either stick your head in the sand and wish for what used to be, or figure it out, make it your own, and figure out a way to use it to move, to make yourself employable, or just to make art again, like to tell a story again. Like, journalists are great at Trojan horses. That is our happy place, especially photojournalists. Like, we take something difficult like war and conflict and try to explain it through something beautiful in an image that gets somebody interested in what the hell's going on in the world. And I feel like that's something that we can lean into more, is how do you get journalists, and also how do you get technologists to understand how to adopt, these mechanisms to help bring back truth and accountability through Trojan horses. I feel like it's something we do that a lot here at JournoDAO, is trying to get journalists to at least understand the tech and what is the green pill to bring them into it.
I think that's a great point, and I would want to. I don't think the path to reform on the journalist part is, being berated into it, but then what is the path? And I think that the numbers game looks very different in Web3. Eric, you're mentioning podcasts, like these long form podcasts that mainstream media and business people in journalism never thought, like, there's no appetite for long form, like nobody cares, like, you're doing podcasts, what? And then 9 years later, they're like, oh, I was always behind podcasts, and I'm starting one myself finally. And so I would like to look at a deeper level, because even like the most moderately successful podcasts are not great businesses, right? It's still that hockey stick. And there's the battle to be like the top in the top five podcasts, and then everything after that is just like hopefuls to get in those top slots, because then you'll just have to drop out. So we do enjoy these um, smaller podcasts during their honeymoon period where they're trying to get big and then they fizzle out, just like most startups, anything like really cool idea. There is like a fit with like a good amount of people, and it's baffling why it can't work. And it's the numbers game of the centralized infrastructure. And so I think the promise of Web3 is a journalist finding the 100 people that care about what they're doing and then making a living off of that because of um, the removal of the centralized money suckers or whatever you want to call them. They're like at this point seem parasitic because they're not really adding any value, but just gatekeeping and keeping people from uh, knowing the things that they want to know. But if it's these direct relationships, the numbers can be a lot smaller, uh, and journalists can uh, do the things that they know need to be done and use their judgment without constantly being funneled into these like single headlines that don't even accurately review their story, but all that people walk away with is the headline and the name, and like they're like, "Oh, I got that story," and that person's an idiot because they wrote that, and it's like, well, you didn't even read, and it's like, I didn't even write that headline, It's just it's not working for anybody, and I think these direct relationships are maybe the way out of it.
So counterpoint to that, to kind of, I guess, steelman uh, the status quo, and this is like what I struggle with too is so like what the centralized middleman I'm thinking like in particular of like one I use, which is like Substack, right? And so what Substack provides that I have yet to find in Web3 tools is, and we talked about this, is the network effects, and then through the network effects, the discoverability for your content or for whatever you're doing. Like how can we address that? Is it just like do you have to do the legwork to build up your community like kind of on your own? I mean, I think it does lend itself to kind of a local first thing where those network effects that like a Substack is going to give you, like they're not as important if we're talking about true like local stuff. Is that maybe more where we have to start, or like how do we address the discoverability thing?
No, it's a great question because we're going through this at the human layer. We're a brand new podcast. And I'm like, all right, we have to put a component together to have some sort of network effect. So I'm using Paragraph right now because I just have an existing email list there. And then Taylor and I have a pretty robust professional network that's not necessarily all Web3. It's both. It's decades of professional work and most of it's on LinkedIn. So then I went under the hood. I was like, oh, do I start a Substack? Or, went through the whole gamut in the last few weeks and landed on a Web2 community building platform. I'm like, how in the year of our Lord 2025, and I've been in crypto this long and there is no crypto equivalent. And then someone sent something the other day that they're like, hey, try this because I'd mentioned it on Twitter. And I'm sure it's going to be a really good platform one day, but all of the features that I needed now that already exist in this Web2 platform, all those features were coming soon. And then so I went into the community to see what it looked like, and I saw names of community containers that were appalling, that I couldn't imagine bringing my colleague from 10 years ago into a community container, and they stumbled onto something called that. And I was like, that's so part of it for me is that for whatever reason, we just haven't built the apps yet in Web3 to solve these problems, which is stunning, being that we are this far into this journey.
I think I've seen some. But, like, it's like the people aren't there. Like, I was messing around with, let's see, so Lens Chain launched or migrated, upgraded. Something happened with Lens a couple months ago, and, like, new and improved Lens is pretty neat, and there's, like, a handful of apps, and there's a few social apps over there, like, it's, like, OX People, and Hey is one, and then there's a few others, and so, like, they've got some pretty cool apps where you can connect your wallet, and you can get like a representation of your social graph, based on wallet transactions, POAPs, like NFTs, and so then you've got a social graph you can that's visualized, and then that's connected to like a social feed. So like it should be easy. Like it's actually better infrastructure and primitives in a lot of ways than like having to move to Instagram where you're starting from zero. I connected my Ethereum wallet to the Lens apps, and like everything's there from like, who I was where I was getting POAPs like 4 years ago. So it's like it's there, like the tech is there, but the networks aren't there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Totally.
Well, so in a situation where the finances work out, where you have like your 100 people, do you need or want network effects? Like perhaps it is a pathology to feel like we all want to reach like as many people as possible, where it's like, "Mm, do we and should we?" And I do think there's a bit of reflexive just compulsion there because that's just like where the carrot was for so long that like that's just where the need is and we go there all the time. Um, but then we complain about everything that falls out of that, right? And so I think there needs to be a reckoning of what we're trying to do and what we're happy with. And when we want this, do we want also all the side effects of it? When we want, like in the case of Substack, isn't that a case of like the fire department also being the arsonist because like their 30% take rate is the reason that you need network effects to make the finances work. And so it's like in in a system where you actually reach the people that care about what you're doing, that you don't have to contort it into some sort of simplistic watered down version so that it makes like wider distribution and reaches people who don't actually care what you're doing, just so that you can get enough ad revenue just to make it worth your time to have written the thing. It's like, well, what happens when we just get rid of the whole dance and then you just do the thing that you think is important? The people who also think it's important find out about it and then they pay you for it gladly because they got more value out of it than they had to pay for it.
So I first heard this argument like 10 years ago from Eric Holthouse, who's a meteorologist and a climate journalist. Used to be quite prolific on social media too, but he co-hosted a podcast called Warm Regards that I was producing behind the scenes, and like we had a meeting, and he was like, I forget the context, but like his point was like, nah, maybe we don't need to grow it anymore. We were talking about advertising, like we had. We were kind of like in that little zone of like 5,000 to 10,000 listeners where you could like 10 years ago, at least, that's where you could kind of start to sell advertising. And we had like one advertiser that was like, kind of paying the server bills or whatever, and like a little bit for me and everybody else. And he was like, yeah, maybe we don't need to grow out. Maybe this is good. Like it was completely anathema to me at the time. And like everything that I had like, based my career around as a journalist and a writer and just like media person, like his argument did not compute in my head. And it didn't start to compute until a few years later, probably around the time I met you, Keith. Um, which that's a compliment. But so yeah, I don't know that like today, like you're kind of referencing, I think, like Kevin Kelly's thousand true fans, right? In terms of like anyone with 1,000 true fans, like, it's willing to pay like what was like $100 a year for your work or something. It's $100,000. Like that's a career. That's a job. That's a living. Um, I've grown a little skeptical of those economics. I don't know that they hold true in 2025, and I think it has something to do with the fact of just being so absolutely awash in content that it has devalued that to like there's so many people to pay $10 subscriptions a month to, that the level of competition, it reminds me of like the literary world where like there's so many people that want to be writers and want to write the great American novel. There's so much competition for so little attention to go around in terms of like the market for novel readers, that like the supply is so you're so oversupplied with writers that the value of that work is vanishes to zero. And it feels like we're kind of reaching that with journalism now, where like everyone calls themselves a journalist, even though journalists are now competing with every content creator. So to me, like I worry a little bit that this like kind of like thousand true fans, like strong community, it's become much harder to pull off in the last 5 years.
Yeah, those are all great points. I actually keep to that point. That's actually what we're experimenting with Human Layer, is that can we create a community container in the I Use Mighty Networks is what we're setting up. This is a complete experiment. I might be totally wrong. Can it be done in the gift economy with a very small community that comes into a container that is completely open and everything is public? And I mean, you still kind of have to be invited in. It's not going to be like a free for all. But can there be enough at that core, at the heart of this community that starts interested in a podcast and then reads some other content that has been spun up from that podcast, or interacts with myself and Taylor through some sort of human face-to-face connection, so that there is a connection that's made? And can they come into a community container and get enough value either from communicating with each other or content we put in that container, which is maybe educational or maybe just artistic? And then is there enough network effect in that community to then support in the gift economy? And I don't know, but it's an extremely like curious experiment that I want to go into, because I feel like as capitalism goes through whatever transformation it's going through, and hopefully at some point we get away from surveillance capitalism, that these types of community containers, be them in a platform or in a knowledge garden or in whatever, that we are able to sustain ourselves from a handful of people that actually engage with whatever you're producing and however you're producing it. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I think there's going to have to be also some sponsors and some patrons. Like I'd love to bring back patrons from back in the day and be like, yes, the value you're putting out is strong enough and there's enough people engaging with it that we just want to support this thing for the next so many months so that more people can engage with it. And I hope the optimistic side of me likes to think that there are enough people that value that type of human engagement with information that we can get there. But I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I will, put out the caveat that uh, I don't expect this to work as just a bolt on to the existing system. Like this is um, requires some vision. I think it's useful to articulate the end state. But I'd, I'd like to say like some simple true things of like it should work this way and it can work this way, rather than it'll never work this way. And here's why, because this is how things are now. And we've we've found and we know that that's a terrible way to predict the future, right? It's like extrapolating out the current state of like right now, like, yeah, nothing innovative was ever foresaw by extrapolating out like current circumstances. So we're already in like the innovation space, and you can go back like any idea that you have right now for some sort of technology, some sort of product, whatever is probably was like a startup like 5, 8, 20 years ago and never could get off the ground, not because it wasn't a good idea, but just because of the financial ecosystem, what it took to the stakes that had to be applied to every idea as like potentially $1 billion has kept us from like so many like value delivering just small businesses, right sized businesses. And I think journalism and the businesses surrounding it could never really make that promise to be a $1 billion unicorn payout for investors, nor should it have, nor should it have had to, just to get the financing to operate in the way that it used to. And I think, it was rotten from the beginning when it took on advertising. But it took on advertising because there wasn't a good model for making money then either. So we are like, square one with how do we get journalists value for the work that they do and like the value that they provide. And unfortunately, people are having to actually see the value of it by it disappearing from their lives. And so like that's what we had to go through. But I think a lot of people who are paying attention can see that just like don't don't attach your old ideas of what journalism used to be or what it is or what people are telling you it is, but the act of just communal emergent truth being delivered to you in a succinct way that is useful to you and allows you to make better decisions towards the goals that you set, not the venue where you're actually consuming that information and that's trying to constantly nudge you into behavior that they think works for them. I think uh, like true, pure empowerment of communities and individuals based in the local focus of where it gives you the power to change things in your everyday life, not just like argue about people you'll never meet with your friends instead of like talking about meaningful things between you. It's just we've we're so distracted from anything approaching signal that it seems like obvious and necessary and doable to just apply some of these technologies to more direct, uh, empowering information gathering and dissemination within communities. And I mean, you can take I think scarcity is a huge driver of value. Like it's not just the 100 people paying whatever. It's like uh, not everyone's going to be a lifetime uh, fan of yours, but if you have 100 seats and then you have some resale market, I think is um, a great tool of digital scarcity currencies is like, okay, there's 100 seats for the subscription, and then people get to uh, buy in early. It's an investment vehicle, so when they are no longer interested in it, they can sell it for an outsized value because along the way, like that creator has like created a bunch of value, created this thing that people want to be a part of, and so they have to buy into it at a premium, and that premium value gets uh, fed back to the creator through like the contract of royalties or whatever the dynamics are for that resale, and the early adopter gets paid out, and the person who is like really into it and wants in, they get to get what they want at like a market price. And it's that sort of, and that's only like one of many mechanics that are now available to us um, through like cryptography and just like the lab that we're in of just how we interact, how we capture value, and what expresses the will of like a group of people around like a shared endeavor. And I mean, in that way, I'm very optimistic, but it has been quite the kick in the balls every day for the last like 20 years up to now.
You both said a word repeatedly there that now makes me want to argue with myself and my earlier pessimism, which is you both said the word value quite a bit, which I think is the most important thing here, and uh, because like I think when I'm thinking of like the 100 true fans or 1,000 true fans thing, um, and I think when that idea first started to circulate, the idea was whatever you do, whatever your thing is, like you can find the people out there that want to like pay you to do your thing and make your art. And like, I don't know that that's true anymore because like now everyone's doing it and some people's art sucks. And like what you're doing, like the number one thing that you're doing might not actually have that kind of permanent audience. But there are places for you to create value where it is like desperately needed. And I think the one that we all agree on is like on the local level, like local news and like just local sources of information. I don't care if you're a journalist or not, but just like there are these huge voids locally and in all sorts of communities. They don't necessarily have to be geographic communities, but like community level news is a place where you can provide value. Like time and time again, like, you know, for the longest time, I thought like the most value I could deliver in the world was like as a journalist and I got signals that told me that and maybe that's not quite as true as you thought. I still personally think the place for me to deliver the most value right now is the stuff that we're talking about right now. And like decentralized technologies are like important and they're like the thing that we need most. And I'm still like dug into that, even though like the signals, when I like go to like talk to people or like introduce myself to people or like they kind of find out like what I'm about, the thing that I'm probably think is most important and where I deliver the most value, it's never what they fucking want to talk about. They never want to talk about crypto. They never want to talk about trail running. They never want to talk about like other stuff that I'm like very passionate about. Like time and time again, they're like, "Wait, you have solar power?" And so it's so like so like as a result, we have the Substack is dedicated to like off grid life. So it's like you should maybe listen to the instead of following the Kevin Kelly route where it's like, I'm going to do my art and 100 people will let me do it forever. Like that might not in this world where everyone's trying to do that. Maybe that doesn't fucking make sense anymore. I know 60% of Gen Z wants to be influencers. It's not gonna happen. So like maybe listen to the signals a little bit more. Like I'm trying to and like find where you can contribute value, and Keith is going to build the tools for you to actually receive that value from your audience. Maybe that's what we're doing.
Oh, I love that. There's like 5 things I wanna follow up with. And I wrote a few down, but one thing that really, and this is more of a personal thing, one of the reasons that I loved working, look, there are a lot of reasons I loved working in Consensus, but one of the things that really impacted me there was I realized I could actually make more impact with our technology by putting it in the hands of folks in Africa, in LATAM, in developers' hands that can then take that technology and change the problem in their community with it. And that was something I tried to do with photography by showing the problems in a community through visuals, and it just never landed. With technology, you can just drop it into a container and then watch it go. And I feel like that is one of the most beautiful things about our tech is watching it just have that network effect as people begin using it in places where it is necessary. We're not there yet in the West, but we're not far from it. So I think that is going to be really, really interesting. And I love that we get together as a family here so often and try to figure these things out, and that Keith's over there building all kinds of cool shit. The other point, and I'm gonna kick it back to Keith for to talk about that cool shit. One thing that you brought up with Gen Z, that I think is gonna be really interesting, and I don't have an answer to this, but I'm just gonna float it out there. You know, we all came through we learned journalism under seasoned veteran journalists. Like my mentors, okay, well, I got lucky enough because I went back to school. I'm like, all right, give me all the smart people. And at J school, the one that I went to was actual people that were professionals, so they weren't academic. And like my photojournalism professor was, he won a Pulitzer for the coverage, his team for the coverage of Columbine shooting. And I got to study under this brilliant old man. He was old at the time that I met him, but created media agenda setting theory in the 70s based on the Kennedy Nixon elections. And then another news writing professor was a community journalist. And so he wrote the textbooks for community journalism. So I got to see the craft from them and then make it my own for the time that I was living in and then apply it. Where are younger journalists that have that, like Gen Z? I love Gen Z's idealism. I love their emotional, connection to what's going on around them. How are they going to learn the craft of journalism if there aren't outlets for them to learn at? Even at the local paper where I used to freelance, I mean, you had crusty old guys on the desk that would tell you their 2 cents all day long, good or bad, but they knew some of the fundamentals of taking a notebook and a pen out onto the street and how to find a source and how to follow the source and how to go there. Are we gonna have like, is this younger generation gonna have that? Because some of what I've seen, just at events or whatever the past few years is a lot of cosplaying with the younger generation, trying to be a journalist and saying they're a journalist, but then dropping the ball on how they talk to a human or how they document an event. And they make the story about them, which I get at a younger, that younger generation. All of us have young egos when we're that age. Like, I get it. But the whole point is that somebody above you cracks that ego a bit and then shows you a way through it. Same with like bartending. All the older guys used to tell you, you fucked this up 5 ways to Sunday. Here's how you do it differently. Anyway, my long tangent here is that still going to be a thing?
Look, I mean, the journalism education system and the system that you're talking about of like apprenticeship and like working your way up, it's like so broken. It's sad, but like the other side of that is like as a result, there's like so many opportunities. It's crazy. There's like go just please fucking leave New York and like just like go anywhere. Just leave Southern California and leave New York and go anywhere and write and find a story. You can also find them in New York and LA actually, but like just go somewhere where there isn't already 10,000 reporters and media people, and like you will find a niche and you will be able to create and deliver that value that we're talking about because there's no competition. So like the opportunities for like anyone with even the slightest amount of curiosity, which by the way, curiosity is like the key to happiness. I don't know if like maybe you'll figure that out at some point if you haven't yet, but like getting outside yourself and like exploring the world and other people is actually the key to a more fulfilling life. And that's a great career. And you can do it fucking anywhere. Just go do it.
My
That's
curiosity is completely satisfied by YouTube autoplay, though. Like,
Well, it is
I
good.
never feel I'm curious. I just feel curious, and then I get the thing, and then yeah. What's the problem? I don't have to go anymore.
That's the point I was
Yeah.
gonna make. Like, I know with a lot of the Gen Zs that I mentor, some of it, it's really hard, like, to even make eye contact because they've grown up with algorithms and having content fed to them. So I would tell, like, just in the rope, but these are not journalists. I'd be like, just drive to the next town or something like in eastern Colorado is the polar opposite view of you. Sit in a diner, drink coffee all day, and listen to the conversation around you, and then you'll have a different perspective. But I know that terrifies the Gen Zs that I know and love. Like, that is just not something that they can grok. Now, I have not worked with a lot of young journalists, Gen Zs, so maybe I'm wrong there.
Well, I'd like to take the market perspective of both of those things. I think the market was driving, uh, it rewarded journalistic principles as we know them for that generation that like you were taught by. And I was lucky to work with some people from that generation. And uh and so it makes sense. It's not like they were like more principled and more like morally strong. It was like that was what got you the edge over your competitor is like actually having a better source, having better information, and that was rewarded by the market and the consumer base valued that. They made their decisions based on that. And so it's I don't think it's Gen Z. It's not like the humans involved. It is that now what is rewarded is like the YouTube experience and how well you fit into that, or like TikTok or whatever. And so we're we're trying to like roast some like generation for just like adapting to the market that they are in. If you want to change the behavior, you change the market. And I think that's some of our hope with the attestations is like you can build your own filter. You can only buy uh, news stories or however you pay or express value or subscribe or whatever. You can only get the stuff that has like three sources. A market can develop that only rewards like the best stuff, but right now, it's a purely advertising attention economy. And I think a lot of us would love to have the option to choose from a lot of different like investigative pieces, long form stuff. We want to reward people. Like even if I don't read something, if I assess quality, I will definitely like throw some resources that person's way. Like we would be empowered to express ourselves and our desires in so many different ways where right now it's all filtered through like surveillance capitalism advertising, which is not only like distorted, but it's a very like very small tube of preference or very low fidelity preference that is being expressed. And I think like there's just nothing but opportunity there. And I don't think we should read into any sort of like behavior pattern or personality pattern into the people who are just kind of like the substrate of this, you know, consumption pattern that we have. It's like, of course, that's how it's going to be. If we change that, people will, they'll do it even better than it used to be done, because people just want to deliver value. They want to be recognized. And the way we're doing that now is just like we're rewarding all the worst stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I don't actually want to throw shade at Gen Z, despite citing that there is survey data about the amount of people that want to be an influencers. I do think that is misguided. However, it is actually a pet peeve of mine. The kind of like generational shade throwing drives me a little nuts. I participate sometimes for fun. I'm really not a fan of the hey boomer thing or of the like throwing shade at Gen Z and
Well,
Gen
before you
Alpha and
fall on
all.
your sword too hard, like it is misguided. It is terrible. Like it shouldn't be this way,
Mm.
but it's not the individual person's
Yeah,
like
right. And there
preference or
is
desire.
right. And a point I was going to make is like there is a lot to actually learn from younger journalists about because the medium is the message and the medium is changing and the medium typically is changed by the younger generation. The like combination of like the shorter content and then the longer form content, like that's the reality. And like we can't really say like, oh, they're doing it wrong because that's not how it's always been done. Like, no, they're how it's done now, that's correct because that's how it's done now. And you just can't really fight that. But like I get actually I'm not portraying my actual feelings very well. I also get pretty mad about a lot of the anti-gerontocracy stuff. I also think is really dangerous and and bad. And like when I hear people talking about an upper limit for running for office, I actually think that's a terrible idea. But that is another podcast.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're talking about too is institutional knowledge. And I feel like, those older generations, whatever container you're talking about, politics, journalism, anything, you need co-generational spaces. And that's what I loved about some of the events that have been in recently. And we talk about this a lot in Europa as well when I was there, is that if you're in a container that has co-generation and you're learning what, let's say GFL, that was a good one in Boulder. You've got I think Gen X is probably the oldest representation there. So you've got Gen X in the room, you've got Gen Z in the room, you've got the middle, and then you can have cross collaboration conversations because you're in person. So like a Gen Z could be like, oh, hey, this is what I think about this. I think you got this wrong. And then you can be like, well, here's why I did XYZ based on my lived experience. How can we shoot down the middle so that that younger generation can take that wisdom, not make the same fuck ups that we made, and then make something more beautiful that connects on their level because their generation does communicate differently. Recently shared that thing in our group chat about I think it was a millennial linguistic that did a talk at a high school
Yeah,
and
that was good.
converted a language to Gen Alpha and it was hilarious. And then I was mortified because I use some of that language because it is in crypto. Some of that is just part of our language. I'm like, oh my God, I must look like a complete idiot at my age to be saying shit like that. And Eric, you've got a young one in the house.
You're just
So
accelerating how soon that language will see its demise from use.
oh my God.
I
Well,
think
I
it's
mean, too much friendly fire in all directions. I mean, the more we can understand, we're all, you know, being forced into this octagon, and then the people who put us in there are like shouting things that we should fight over. And like, that guy called you an asshole. Like, go get him. And it's like every time we're like, wait, he did? And then we go over and start something. Like, we gotta get out of that habit. But I think one macro metaphor that came to me, you know, why all this is happening is y'all know Cyclops from the X-Men? He has like the laser eyes or whatever. So every time he opens his eyes, whatever it just like blasts out and destroys whatever he looks at. And I feel like that is like a metaphor for our like collective attention that was like turned on with the internet. And we didn't know necessarily on a collective level that like whatever we like turned our attention on just like manifested and destroyed everything in its path, but eventually he gets the glasses, he gets some control over it or whatever, and we need to figure out how to collectively focus our attention on things that we care about and the things that we actually like at a deep level want to have happen, not just like because we want to be entertained for 5 seconds, even if it like blows up a small city and like some other part of the country that we don't care about, but like it was a pretty funny name. So like send me more of that, please. Right. Like we're not anytime you like disconnect somebody from like how things are made, they're just gonna like make shitty decisions over like the production of that thing. So I would like to encourage like everyone on the individual level to just not pay attention to what you don't like about what's happening, but pay attention to what you do like because that is the stuff that ends up sticking around and manifesting. And that's like a basic, just, a lot of the stuff we're talking about can't be fixed on the individual level. But I think if we choose where we put our attention and we make those choices, we just let the trivial shit go and it will go away, right? If we focus on meaningful stuff, then meaningful stuff will stick around and it will be rewarded. And that's something that like we can all do. And we don't even feel good paying attention to the shitty stuff either. So it's like we need some sort of virtuous cycle instead of this like corrosion cycle that we're in where it's just like, oh, I feel worse. Let me just like see something that makes me feel even worse. Like
So
it's just it's bad, but I think like we can turn it around if we understand that it is our attention. We do have a responsibility. Attention has power even on the individual level. And if you think of it as like whatever you pay attention to is what is manifested, then just try that experiment for the day. Like, okay, whatever I pay attention to, there's going to be more of it. And if you actually feel that, you would make different choices throughout the day. And I think that's like what the internet is doing is like, I mean, if you're upset with the political situation, that is what we paid attention to. And it just is going to the extreme. Just, and I know it's hard for journalists in particular. They're like, we got to surface all of the bad shit, right? It needs to be the context of what we want to see. There's this like quote that I heard that's sticking with me is like, you end war not by hating war, but by loving peace. It's like you're in some ways contributing to that energy of war and uh, dysfunction and polarity and separation. If that's like what you hate, it feels like you're fixing it by hating it, and you're paying attention to all the people who are like dissing on people, dunking on people, and like you got your side and you're just going to take down this other side or whatever. But you can see at its core that it's really just going to perpetuate. And I think that's what technology is interesting, uh, or what it does that people really are drawn to is it's like envisioning how you want things to be. Like, okay, I can build something, I can build the world that I want to be, and you're focused on the positive rather than what you don't like. You're like, no, I want this, and you're not thinking about I don't want that, right?
No, that was a great point. I feel like, I mean, it's time to start wrapping it up, although I could just stay here and talk about journalism all day, but we do have lives to go live. And I feel like Keith just kind of gave us the closer right there. Eric, do you want to take us anywhere else before we say goodbye and move on for the day?
I mean, I guess to build on what Keith was saying, because I'm kind of listening to you and thinking, yes, but the point of journalism is to like also shine a light on the shitty stuff. But I think like the the thing to remember is like as a journalist, you do get to choose what angle you shine that light on the shitty stuff from, and to maybe like always try to remember the human side of it and like the human impact of it, what you're covering versus just the the what's going to go viral, what's going to send it trending, and just to, like I was saying earlier, just to maybe follow the curiosity of the thing, and that will typically lead you to the more positive place, I think, versus just following the crowd, following the trend, following what's already hot. Just I think a journalist, I think it was Amy Goodman, said, you go to where the silences are.
That's a great one. Yeah. The silences. I feel like one of the things about a journalist, sometimes I compare it to technologists that I work with. When they see a bug in code, they have to keep going until they find hackers as well. They have to keep going until they find the anomaly that triggered that cycle in their brain that saw the problem and had to go through to find the solution. And journalists have that same wiring of the brain. Like we see an anomaly in a human behavior, and then we have to figure out what is that anomaly? What is causing that? What is causing this person in this situation to lash out this way or to act this way? And usually, as we begin to unwind the story and the external factors that are pressuring and causing this reaction, we see the entire system has flaws in it or kinks in the system. Whatever societal system that this person or this entity has relied upon are fracturing, and we're seeing more of that now. And I really struggle with not seeing it, trying to look away and just staying in the positive. It's one of the reasons I went and study yoga at Naropa the way that I did, because I had a skill set to understand the world through journalism. I did not have a skill set to process the world. And I feel like that is the next part, is like, how can our nervous system consume all of this information that's going on in the world around us, assimilate it, compost it in a way that allows us to make something positive, to tell a positive story, to look at that situation that has all of that externalities causing this really horrible situation and extract something good, or at least something neutral, or something that someone can connect with that isn't in that war zone or that isn't in that extreme poverty situation. How can we find those bridges, or even use those Trojan horses that we're really good at to bring those situations to light in a world that they are now amplified everywhere? Or do we bring them to light? I mean, everybody knows things are going on, wars are happening, and there's not much we can do about it in this situation here. So, what do we do to counterbalance the collective? Is it meditation? Is it some sacred wisdom? Or is it telling a story a different way? Or is it just going down to your local farmer's market and telling a good human story to counterbalance the other realities that we're in? So I don't have
Yeah.
answers to that.
Well, I wouldn't recommend feeling the pressure to turn every like one of the many negatives into a positive, but I think they're taking an extra step to then think of not like, wow, how crappy does this world have to be for this to happen? And then bring in the narrative of like all the other crappy stuff that is happening and how it all just like is confirming each other in itself. And it's just validating this like very dark perception of the world. Where before you do that, if you see the crappy thing and then try and picture what would the world have to be like for that not to happen. And that's kind of like the technology mindset is like, let's not at all minimize this and say that it is, let's not just be compulsively silver lining. Like, but then let's just take an extra step and envision a better world where this like doesn't happen and try and get inspiration from that because it is a choice that I think we're all capable of making it once we see it as like we can either like go back and we can like feel the pull down into like all the other stuff and like just confirm our worst our worst feelings about that event, of which there are many. And that's like what has led us here. And I would just suggest the counterintuitive and perhaps the how we get out of this is taking the step up and being like, okay, let's not minimize it. Let's not change that initial reaction that is like valid, but how we respond to it is um, towards the solution, and not necessarily even like how do we solve this, but like what would have to happen in the world for that not to be the case, or for that to have been avoided. And then we're putting our attention uh, on a more positive thing. Like if everybody does that, then that circumstance will disappear from the world if we're all picturing that.
So
Yeah.
I see my life's work, and I think I'm see if this jives with what you're saying, Keith. So I see my life's work as a writer, so journalism and then other kinds of writing. But my life's work as a writer primarily focused on technology is writing about the story of technology, which is an iterative process of using tools to adjust the balance of the dark side of human nature, to compensate for the dark side of human nature, and to push the scales toward the better side of our nature, and using technology iteratively. Like we did it with the internet. The internet is the best like invention of our lifetimes, but like we didn't get the balance right. I think it was a net improvement, but like some things got fucked up along the way, and so now we're in the iterative cycle where we're correcting for what went wrong with the internet, with blockchain and AI and other things, and I think we're already correcting for mistakes with blockchain. We will very soon be correcting for mistakes with AI. And so it's this iterative process that never stops, but you're like MLK said, you're like it's always kind of bending towards justice and towards adjusting for and over indexing on the better side of human nature. That's my theory.
Oh, that's interesting. Like one thing that popped up when you said, Keith, what you were just saying is bypassing. And we can't bypass what we're witnessing because then it just comes up in some other place in a really weird way. And along the lines of what you just said, Eric, like my work started when I was doing photojournalism. It was after a period of like grief and sorrow that in my personal life. And then what I found, which was really weird about 7 or 8 years later, is that I could sit with someone else's sorrow and just be present with it and document it. And I was like, oh, that's a fucking weird skill set. And also, it allowed me to craft my journalism career to witness in situations that were extremely difficult. Like there are pictures I didn't take because I knew it would shatter that person's life. If I clicked the shutter, like there's just no way I could be that person. And so, like that to me, taking those skills and then using them now because I don't really photograph anymore. So, what do I do when that rage surfaces so I don't bypass it? And then have to deal with it later or just ignore it and pretend that everything's great, but then also not get consumed by it and still be able to function in the world. And it's through rage writing. I'll just get pissed and like write some shit. And half of it doesn't end up on the internet, but sometimes it ends up on my Twitter at midnight. So that's fun to watch. But that's another way to not bypass because bypassing is just really, really dangerous. And as journalists, we're just not wired to do it.
And it is entertaining to watch at midnight on your Twitter feed.
Yeah, that's where you're gonna find your 100 true fans there for sure. Like, you gotta find a way, grab them.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you're still with us, this is what we do. We turn on the mic and just talk at JournoDAO. So thank you all for letting us, host the mic for this. And Keith and Eric, thank y'all for this wild journey. We didn't even get into JournoDAO origin story. All right, we're gonna have to put that in our because we didn't even get to talk about how this whole thing started, but how amazing it is to work with y'all on these wild ass issues. And it's
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thanks, Crystal, for
Thanks for
putting this
raging.
together.